What would you do if the person you love most was slowly disappearing? Not into death, but into darkness. One winter night, a mother heard her son's scream echo through the storm and made a choice that would change both their lives forever. From the edge of addiction to the light of redemption, this is not just a story of survival, but of faith strong enough to melt the coldest snow. Because sometimes, love doesn't look like grand gestures. It looks like staying, praying, and believing when everyone else walks away. Share in the comments. Have you ever witnessed someone rise from their darkest moment? If this story touches you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Her Rebirth Path for more stories of hope and rebirth. The snow had begun at dusk. A slow, silent fall that blanketed the small Colorado town in white, soft as ash from some distant fire. By midnight, it had turned fierce. The wind howled through the pines behind the Reed family's small cabin, shaking the windows as if to warn what was coming. Inside, Emma Reed sat at the kitchen table, hands clasped tight around a chipped mug of tea gone cold. The clock ticked past 2 a.m., each second heavier than the last. Behind the closed bathroom door, her son Noah's breathing had turned into ragged gasps, then angry shouts, then nothing at all. "Please, Lord," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. "Not tonight. Please, not tonight." Noah had been clean for 43 days. She'd counted them like candles on a cake, one for each miracle. He promised her Christmas would be different this year. But addiction, Emma had learned, was a cruel ghost, one that never knocked before it came inside. Outside, their 5-year-old German shepherd, Cooper, began to bark. The sound echoed through the house, sharp and frantic. Emma rose, her slippers sliding on the wooden floor, and pressed her ear to the door. Inside, she heard a crash, the sound of glass shattering, and then a moan that made her heart stop. "Noah?" she called softly. No answer. Only the wind and the faint, desperate scratching of Cooper's paws against the door. Emma's hands shook as she turned the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Locked. Her throat tightened. "Noah, open this door!" she cried, slamming her palm against it. The wood vibrated, but still. Silence. She tried again, her voice cracking. "Please, baby, it's Mom. Talk to me." For a moment, the storm outside seemed to swallow her cries whole. Then, faintly, came a sound, a choked sob, followed by a whisper, fragile and lost. I can't do this anymore." Emma's tears blurred her vision. She threw her shoulder against the door once, twice, until the frame splintered and gave way. The smell hit her first, sharp, chemical, wrong. Noah lay on the floor, pale and shaking, his eyes glassy under the flickering bathroom light. A small syringe rolled beside him, catching the light like a cruel reminder. Emma dropped to her knees. "Oh, sweetheart, no, no, no." Her trembling hands cupped his face, searching for life. "Stay with me, Noah. Please, just breathe." Cooper burst into the room, circling them, whining low in his throat. Emma looked up, desperate, as if the dog could tell her what to do. Her mind spun. Call 911? Pray? Both? She reached for her phone, but her fingers wouldn't obey. Noah's lips moved faintly. "Mom," he whispered, voice barely a breath. "I'm sorry. I thought I could stop. I just wanted to feel normal again." Emma's tears fell into his skin, mixing with the cold sweat that covered him. "You are normal, baby. You're mine. You're still here." She pressed her forehead to his, whispering every prayer she could remember. The storm outside roared louder, as if testing her faith. Cooper whined again, pawing at Noah's arm, then sat still, waiting. For one long, trembling moment, time stopped. The only sound was the storm's howl and Emma's soft plea, "Please, God, don't take him." Then a sound, a gasp. Noah's chest lifted once, shallow, uncertain, before falling still again. Emma froze. "Noah?" she whispered. His eyes opened halfway, unfocused, staring through her as if at something distant. And then, just a whisper, barely audible over the wind, he said, "Mom, I'm scared." Emma's heart shattered. She pulled him close, rocking him like the boy he once was. Cooper pressed his head against Emma's arm, eyes wet, tail still. The wind slammed against the window and the power flickered out. Darkness swallowed the room. Only the sound of Emma's sobs filled the night. When the lights returned a moment later, the snow outside was still falling, gentle again, almost peaceful. Emma looked down at her son, motionless in her arms, her breath coming in broken gasps. Outside, the siren of an ambulance began to wail in the distance, slicing through the storm. But as it grew nearer, Noah's body grew colder. Emma stared at his still face, and in her heart, one question formed. One that no mother ever wants to ask. Did I find him too late? The soft hum of machines filled the small hospital room, a rhythm between life and loss. Tubes ran along Noah's arms like pale vines, carrying a second chance through his veins. Emma sat beside him, her hands folded tightly around his. Hands that once held him as a newborn, and now held him as if holding on to the last thread of grace. The morning light filtered weakly through the blinds, touching his face with the faint warmth of dawn. For a moment, she could almost believe everything would be all right. Then the monitors beeped faster, and her heart seized. Nurses rushed in, their voices sharp yet calm. Emma was pushed gently aside as they adjusted wires and whispered terms she didn't understand. All she could do was pray. Her breath trembled through the words, "Please, Lord, if you give him back to me, I will never take another day for granted." Minutes later, the room grew quiet again. The doctor, a kind-eyed man named Dr. Bennett, turned to her with a sigh that sounded heavier than it should. "He's stable," he said softly, "but his heart is very weak. If he ever relapses, it won't survive another shock." Emma nodded, though her eyes blurred with tears. Weak heart or not, her son was alive. That was enough for now. Hours passed. The snow outside melted into slush beneath the weak winter sun. Emma wiped her face with her sleeve and looked at Noah, his chest rising, falling, a fragile rhythm that tethered her to hope. Cooper lay curled at her feet, his brown eyes never leaving the bed. He hadn't eaten all day, yet every time a nurse entered, his ears perked, guarding the room like a loyal sentinel. When Noah stirred for the first time, Emma's heart skipped. His lips parted, dry and cracked. "Mom?" She leaned close, smiling through tears. "I'm here, sweetheart. You're safe." Noah blinked, confused, his gaze wandering toward the window, where snow still drifted lazily. "Am I alive?" Emma squeezed his hand. "Yes." "And you're staying that way, do you hear me?" He gave a faint nod before whispering, "I don't deserve this." Her throat tightened. "None of us do," she said softly, brushing his hair from his forehead. "That's why it's called grace." In the days that followed, the hospital became their world. Emma learned how to measure medication, how to calm his nightmares, how to smile when fear tried to crawl back in. She told him stories of when he was little, how he'd feed stray cats, how he once gave his favorite toy truck to a boy crying in the park. "You've always had a good heart," she would remind him. you just forgot for a while. At night, when Noah trembled from phantom cravings, Cooper climbed onto the bed, resting his head gently on the young man's thigh. Noah's breathing steadied each time, his fingers finding the dog's fur as if it anchored him to the present. The nurses began calling Cooper the guardian. Almost the 10th night, when Emma dozed in the chair, she woke to find Noah sitting upright, staring at his shaking hands. The moonlight spilled through the blinds, outlining his face in silver. "It's still inside me, Mom," he whispered, voice shaking. "The craving, it's still there." Emma didn't tell him it would disappear. She knew better. She simply took his hands and pressed them against her heart. "Then we'll face it together. Every time it comes back, we'll meet it with love, not fear." Noah looked at her, at the weary lines on her face, the quiet strength in her eyes. And for the first time, something inside him cracked open. Not the sharp pain of guilt, but a trembling desire to live. The next morning, Dr. Bennett entered with a gentle smile. "You're strong, Noah," he said. "You made it through the storm. Now it's about learning to live again." Emma nodded, tears glistening. "We'll learn," she said. "Both of us." Outside, the sun finally broke through the gray sky, spilling light over the melting snow. Inside, Cooper thumped his tail once, as if sensing what the humans couldn't yet say aloud, that something had shifted. Life had returned, quiet but certain, like spring beneath the last frost. From that day, the journey of healing began. Not just for Noah, but for the mother who refused to give up. The snow outside had long melted, leaving muddy patches of earth and a chill that still lingered in the air. Inside the Reed home, the days passed more quietly now. The hum of the oxygen machine was gone. Noah could walk again, his skin no longer pale like parchment. He woke early, fed Cooper, and sometimes even helped Emma with breakfast. For a while, it seemed the world had softened. But healing, Emma learned, was not a straight road. It curved through shadows, sometimes doubling back into places you thought you'd left behind. That afternoon, as she folded laundry in the living room, she saw Noah outside through the frosted window, standing by the gate, speaking to someone. A tall man in a dark hoodie, hands stuffed in his pockets, snow melting off his shoes. Emma's stomach tightened. The shape, the posture, it stirred an unease she couldn't name. When she stepped outside, the man turned, grinning faintly. "Hey, Mrs. Reed, remember me? Jake." Emma's face went pale. Jake, the same friend who'd once introduced Noah to the escape, as they used to call it. Noah's voice was quiet, almost apologetic. "He just stopped by to say hi, Mom." Jake nodded, flashing that same careless smile. "Yeah, just checking in. It's been a while, huh? You look good, bro. You want to hang out later? Maybe talk about old times?" Emma's heart beat faster. She knew what old times meant. Her eyes moved to Noah's, searching for strength, for resolve. He looked away. That night, Noah grew restless. He paced the small living room, his fingers twitching like they remembered something his mind wanted to forget. Cooper followed him, silent and watchful. By midnight, Emma heard the sound of the garage door creak open. Her heart sank. She rose from bed, slipping her coat over her nightgown, and followed the cold trail of air that leaked through the hall. The garage smelled of motor oil and regret. Noah sat on the floor, shoulders trembling, his hand clenched around a small glass vial. His face was pale again, his breath uneven. Emma didn't speak right away. She stood in the doorway, her heart breaking quietly as she watched her son wrestle with himself. The shaking hands, the whispered apologies no one else could hear. When he finally noticed her, he froze like a child caught in the dark. "Mom, it's not what it looks like." Her voice came gentle, steady, though her knees trembled. "It looks like you're about to lose everything you fought for." He looked down, tears sliding across his cheeks. "I thought I was stronger than this. I just wanted the noise to stop." Emma crossed the room and knelt beside him. She didn't take the vial, didn't scold, didn't cry. Instead, she wrapped her arms around his shoulders and whispered, "If you fall, I'm still here. But please, my son, choose the light." Her words came out like a prayer, not a plea. And for the first time, Noah didn't push her away. He sat there, shaking, until his fingers loosened and the vial rolled away, a tiny clink on the cold cement floor. Outside, the wind whistled faintly through the eaves, and Cooper gave a single, soft bark, as if to mark the moment. Later that night, they sat together by the fireplace. The flames painted their faces gold and warm. Emma read from her worn Bible, the one with pages curled at the edges. Her voice was calm, unhurried. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Noah leaned back, eyes closed, letting the words settle inside him like the first steady breath after a storm. "Do you really think light wins, Mom?" he asked quietly. Emma smiled faintly. "It always does, but only if we let it." Cooper rested his head on Noah's knee, sighing softly. The snow began to fall again outside, not heavy this time. Just a few quiet flakes drifting down under the porch light. In that silence, something shifted. Small, fragile, but real. The ghost of the past was still there, but now it had a name. And Noah knew, at last, that he didn't have to face it alone. That night, faith took root in both their hearts. The kind of faith that doesn't erase the darkness, but teaches you how to walk through it. Winter had returned, but it was gentler this time. The wind no longer screamed against the windows. It hummed, low and patient, like a hymn. The snow lay quietly across the fields behind the Reed house, untouched except for two sets of footprints, one belonging to Noah, the other to Cooper, who bounded beside him every morning. Noah had started running again, not to escape, but to remember what it felt like to move without fear. The first few mornings were painful. His lungs burned, his legs felt heavy. But Cooper was always there, pacing ahead, turning back every few yards as if to say, "Keep going, you can do this." At first, Emma worried the cold might be too harsh. She'd watch from the window, her breath fogging the glass, a cup of coffee trembling in her hands. But each time Noah returned, cheeks flushed, eyes bright, and snow clinging to his hair, she could see it. The light had come back to her son's face. Not the artificial glow of recovery milestones, but the quiet, steady warmth of someone learning to live again. He began keeping a small notebook on the kitchen table, where he wrote a few lines each day, not about guilt, but gratitude. The air today was cold, but I could breathe. That's something. Or, Cooper barked at a squirrel and looked proud of himself for saving me. Emma would smile as she read those words when he wasn't looking. She didn't tell him, but she copied a few into her own journal, the one she had once filled with prayers for his survival. In the evenings, their home filled with small, ordinary joys that once seemed impossible. The oven's warmth, the smell of cinnamon rolls, Cooper's paws tapping across the floor. Emma hummed old hymns while she cooked. Noah joined in, off-key but laughing. It was the kind of peace that didn't make headlines, but changed the air in a room. Still, Emma sometimes woke in the night and checked on him. afraid it was all too fragile, that she'd open his door and find the darkness again. But each time, she found him sitting on the floor, cross-legged, eyes closed, breathing slowly, Cooper curled up beside him. One morning, she asked, "What do you think about when you sit like that?" Noah smiled, mostly about breathing, about not trying to fix everything, just being. Emma nodded, though she didn't fully understand. But she saw the peace in his face, and that was enough. Days turned into weeks. The snow deepened, and so did Noah's calm. He started reading again. Books about mindfulness, stories about forgiveness, letters from people who had lost and found themselves again. One afternoon, Emma came home from the grocery store to find him painting a small wooden sign. It read, "One day at a time." He nailed it above the doorway. When Emma asked why, Noah said, "Because that's all we really have, isn't it? Just this day." That night, they sat by the fireplace. The room glowed gold and quiet. Cooper stretched between them, paws twitching in a dream. Noah looked at his mother and said softly, "You know, Mom, I used to think the miracle was that I survived. But I think the real miracle is that you never stopped believing I could." Emma didn't answer right away. Her throat felt tight, her eyes glistening. She reached for his hand. "The miracle," she whispered, "was that you came back to me. Not the boy you were, but the man you were meant to become." The snow outside thickened, layering the world in silence. From the window, their footprints from that morning were almost gone, swallowed by the fresh white. Emma smiled at the sight. "Funny," she said, "how the snow erases everything, yet somehow makes the world feel brand new." Noah nodded. Maybe that's what forgiveness does too. Emma looked at her son, truly looked, and realized something deep within her heart. The miracle she had begged for wasn't waiting in the heavens. It had been growing quietly here, in their little house, in laughter, in second chances, and in love. That winter, the Reeds learned that sometimes the greatest prayers are answered not by angels, but by the courage to forgive. Years slipped by quietly, like snow melting into streams beneath the first sun of spring. The world around the Reed house changed. Trees grew taller, the mailbox rusted a little more. But inside, something constant bloomed. Noah had rebuilt his life, not with grand gestures, but with small, faithful steps. He spent his mornings reading books on philosophy, mindfulness, and the art of healing, often pausing to jot down thoughts in his notebook. His handwriting, once shaky from withdrawal, had become steady and deliberate. Each word carried a piece of his journey, the pain, the lessons, the forgiveness. Emma loved to hear him read aloud. Some afternoons, she'd sit in her old rocking chair by the window, knitting while Noah shared passages that moved him. "Listen to this, Mom," he'd say softly. "A healed heart doesn't mean the pain never existed. It means it no longer controls you." She'd smile, her fingers pausing mid-stitch. "Sounds like you wrote that yourself," she'd tease. He'd laugh. "Maybe I did." Outside, Cooper lay stretched in the sun, his muzzle now dusted with gray. He was slower these days, but his spirit never dimmed. Every morning, he still waited by the door, tail wagging, ready for their walk. Sometimes Noah would look down at the old dog and whisper, "You saved me too, buddy." Cooper's eyes, wise and gentle, seemed to answer, "I just reminded you who you were." Emma, too, had begun to find her rhythm again. She returned to her old part-time job at the library, a place that smelled of old pages and peace. There, surrounded by shelves of stories, she felt her world expand again. The loneliness that had once haunted her no longer frightened her. She understood now. Solitude was not emptiness. It was space for gratitude to grow. Every evening, when she came home, she'd find Noah at his desk by the window. A small lamp cast a golden glow over him as he wrote. Sometimes he'd pause, tapping his pen against his chin, lost in thought. Other times, words seemed to flow effortlessly, as if something greater than himself guided his hand. Emma never asked what he was writing. She knew some stories needed silence before they could become words. Then, one spring evening, as twilight spilled through the curtains, Noah came to her with a folder in his hands. His eyes held the same mix of excitement and fear she had once seen in him as a child before his first day of school. "Mom," he said quietly, placing the folder on the table. "I finished it." Emma looked at the cover. Simple, white, and unassuming. 3 words were printed in calm black letters. "Live lightly." Beneath it, in smaller print, by Noah Reed. For a moment she couldn't speak. Her fingers brushed the paper, trembling slightly. "This is your book?" He nodded, a small smile forming. "It's about everything we've been through, about learning to love yourself without forgetting where you came from, about forgiving even when it feels impossible." Emma's eyes glistened. "You wrote about us?" "No," he said softly, shaking his head. "I wrote about what love does when it refuses to give up." She pressed a hand over her heart. "That sounds like us to me." He chuckled, wiping a tear from her cheek. Maybe a little. They sat together at the kitchen table, the same one that had once held broken bottles and unpaid bills. Now it held a manuscript, the story of redemption, born from the ashes of pain. Cooper padded in, settling between them, resting his head on Emma's knee. The soft hum of crickets drifted in from outside, and the air smelled faintly of blooming lilacs. Emma turned a few pages, her eyes moving slowly over the words. She stopped at one sentence and read aloud. "Peace is not the absence of storms, but the calm we find when we stop fighting the rain." She looked up, tears glimmering. "You really did come back to me, didn't you?" Noah nodded. "In every way that matters." The sun had set by then, leaving only the warm lamplight and the soft rhythm of Cooper's breathing. Emma reached out, placed her hand over Noah's, and whispered, "You've written the very thing you lived. A miracle." And as she closed the folder, a single tear fell onto the page, not of sorrow, but of gratitude. That night, under the quiet spring sky, a mother and son finally understood. Rebirth wasn't a single moment. It was a choice made every day. To live lightly, to forgive deeply, and to keep loving no matter how heavy life once was. 7 years later, the city of New York shimmered beneath a pale winter sun. The streets buzzed with life, yellow taxis honking, snow melting into tiny rivers along the curbs, and people moving briskly, chasing time. Inside an old concert hall on 47th Street, rows of folding chairs filled with faces both eager and expectant. At the front of the room stood a wooden podium and a single spotlight. Behind the curtain, Noah Reed took a slow breath. The air smelled faintly of dust and polished wood, a scent that reminded him of every library, every sleepless night, every small miracle that had led him here. He touched the folded notes in his pocket, though he already knew he wouldn't need them. The story lived too deeply inside him to be read. "5 minutes, Mr. Reed," said the event organizer, a young woman with a headset and a nervous smile. "Thank you," Noah replied softly. His voice was calm, but his heart beat with a familiar rhythm, not of fear, but of awe. Out in the audience, Emma sat in the first row, her silver hair glowing softly under the lights. Cooper lay at her feet, now an old soul with cloudy eyes, his body slower, but his loyalty unwavering. She reached down and brushed her fingers through his fur, whispering, "We made it, didn't we, boy?" Cooper gave a faint wag of his tail, as if agreeing. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the room. When Noah stepped onto the stage, for a moment he couldn't speak. The sight before him, hundreds of faces, some smiling, some teary, all waiting, overwhelmed him with gratitude. He adjusted the microphone and began. "I used to think healing meant forgetting," he said, his voice steady but full of warmth. "That if I could erase the pain, the shame, the past, I'd finally be free. But healing isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering without breaking." A quiet murmur rippled through the audience. He paused, scanning the front row until his eyes met his mother's. She smiled, and something inside him softened. "I didn't save myself," he continued. "I was saved by faith, not my own, but my mother's. She believed when I had nothing left to believe in. She taught me that gentleness is not weakness, that kindness can rebuild what pain has torn apart." Emma's hands tightened around Cooper's leash. Tears welled in her eyes as she listened. Not as a mother proud of her son's success, but as a woman who had witnessed resurrection in its truest form. Noah spoke for almost an hour, about fear and grace, about forgiveness that takes years to ripen, and about learning to love life one breath at a time. The room stayed utterly silent, as if the audience was afraid to disturb the fragile beauty of the moment. Then he said something that drew every heart closer. "When I was at my lowest, I thought I was a burden. But my mother once told me, 'You are not broken, you are becoming.' And she was right. Every scar, every stumble, they were all part of the becoming." Someone in the back began to clap, then another, and soon the entire hall rose to its feet. Applause thundered, echoing against the walls. Noah smiled, blinking through tears he didn't try to hide. He looked down at Emma. She stood too, one hand over her heart, the other gripping Cooper's leash. Their eyes met, mother and son, survivor and believer. No words passed between them, but they both knew. This was the miracle they had waited for. Not fame, not success, but peace. As the applause swelled, Cooper barked once, a small, hoarse sound that made the whole room laugh. Noah laughed too, wiping his face. When the noise began to fade, he said softly into the microphone, "My story began with darkness, but it didn't end there. Because love, real love, never lets you stay where it found you." The audience fell silent again, letting those words linger like the last note of a song. Under the golden light of the hall, Emma closed her eyes and whispered a prayer of thanks. She had asked for one miracle and received 1,000 small ones instead, each one a day her son chose to live. In that hall, between the mother's tears and the son's steady voice, they both understood. The light they had searched for was never above them, but within them all along. The winters in Colorado had grown quieter over the years. The trees stood bare against a sky the color of faded silver, and the snow that once seemed endless now came and went like a soft memory. Inside the small cabin, time had slowed to a gentle rhythm. The tick of an old clock, the crackle of firewood, the soft sigh of an aging dog resting by the hearth. Emma Reed sat in her favorite armchair near the window, wrapped in a wool blanket that Noah had brought her from New York. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned the pages of a familiar book. Live lightly. The corners of the pages were worn, the words underlined in pencil. She smiled, tracing her fingers over her son's name on the cover. Cooper lay at her feet, his once black coat now silvered with time. He lifted his head and looked at her with those same loyal eyes that had watched over Noah through every storm. Emma reached down and stroked his fur, whispering, "You've been with us through everything, haven't you, old friend?" From the doorway came Noah's voice, deeper now, softer, steadier. "He's still your best listener." Emma looked up, her eyes lighting up in that way only a mother's can. "You're home," she said. "Always," Noah replied, setting his travel bag aside. He crossed the room and kissed her forehead, his hands still warm from the cold outside. Every winter, he returned, no matter how busy his life had become, no matter how far the world called him. He would trade the noise of cities for the hush of snow to sit beside his mother and remember where it all began. That evening, the fire glowed gold, wrapping the room in quiet light. Emma sat in her chair, and Noah sat beside her, reading aloud passages from his later books. Stories of forgiveness, hope, and gentle strength. His voice was calm, like a river in the thaw of spring. Emma closed her eyes and listened, her heart full. "You write about me sometimes," she teased softly. He smiled. "Always. You're the quiet hero behind every chapter." Outside, the wind began to rise again, brushing against the window panes like an old friend returning for one last visit. Cooper stirred, shifting closer to the warmth. Noah placed another log on the fire, then turned to his mother. "Do you ever miss those old days?" he asked quietly. Emma chuckled. "The ones where you made me chase you through snowdrifts at midnight?" "Not particularly." He laughed, shaking his head. "I meant the hard ones. The ones that made us who we are." Emma thought for a moment, her gaze distant. "I don't miss them," she said slowly, "but I'm grateful for them. Pain teaches us to see clearly. It's how we learn to love gently." Noah nodded, the firelight flickering across his face. "I understand that now." A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the rhythm of the flames. After a while, Emma's breathing grew slower, and her eyes softened with fatigue. She reached for Noah's hand, her fingers thin and cool against his. "If there's a real miracle in this world," she whispered, her voice fragile but sure, "it's being able to live on in someone else's heart. When love outlasts the body, that's the closest thing to heaven I can imagine." Noah's throat tightened. He held her hand gently, afraid to speak, afraid to let go. Outside, the snow began to fall again. Slow, tender, forgiving. The flakes drifted past the window like quiet blessings. Emma looked at them with a peaceful smile. "See?" she murmured. "Even the snow knows when it's time to rest." Noah leaned closer, his voice barely above a breath. "Rest, Mom. You've carried enough." But Emma's eyes, though tired, still glowed with light. "No, my dear. I'm not resting yet. I'm still watching you live." They sat together until the fire burned low, and the storm outside softened into silence. When dawn came, the snow had begun to melt, and the first faint light of spring stretched across the horizon, gold against white. Noah rose quietly to open the curtains. The light touched his face, and he smiled, whispering to the morning, "Live lightly, Mom." Behind him, Emma stirred in her chair, her breathing calm and steady, as if carried on the rhythm of peace itself. And in that quiet house, where love had conquered darkness and time, A son's whispered promise met a mother's final prayer. That life, when lived gently, becomes its own kind of eternity. There are moments in life when the quiet becomes a kind of prayer. When we see how every hardship, every heartbreak, and every small act of love we once gave somehow circles back to grace. That was Emma's legacy and Noah's promise. To live lightly, love deeply, and forgive endlessly. Perhaps the true miracles of God aren't thunder or fire from the skies, but the soft strength that carries us through ordinary days. The faith to keep believing when nothing makes sense. The courage to choose kindness when the world feels cold. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a little light today. Leave a comment with your own story of faith or forgiveness. And don't forget to like and subscribe to her Rebirth path. Together, we can keep spreading God's quiet miracles. May God bless everyone watching, and may His peace rest gently upon your heart.